She tried to give away my villa. The smart home said no. Smart home revenge? No, legal boundaries. My daughter tried to give away my villa. I let the house speak, and the judge sealed it. Stay for the 2 a.m. technical malfunction, and the deed twist nobody saw coming. Lights snapped to life like lightning, red, blue, white, pulsing off the Tahoe windows while faucets roared to full blast. Drowning whispers that seemed to crawl out of the drywall. A stern voice rolls through the halls. Unauthorized occupants detected. Leave the premises. Footsteps pound, a door rattles. And someone screams my name like I'm the problem, not the deed holder. Outside, the storm pushes 40-mile gusts across the lake. Inside, the house doesn't so much as blink. Backup batteries hum. Steady as a church organ. A son-in-law swings at a camera, gets baptized by the sprinklers for his trouble. Somewhere a phone dials 911, and an officer mutters the words I knew he would. Technical malfunction. Now picture this, cut from chaos to a Texas porch at sunrise. The air's a crisp 62 degrees Fahrenheit, coffee steaming in my right hand, my bad knee behaving for once. I was born at night, but not last night. My name's Hank Walker. I built houses for 40 years, and this one by the lake was meant for growing old with my Elizabeth. After she passed, I got soft where I should have stood firm. Then Megan called it theirs, and I remembered an old line from Liz's letter, be kind, but don't be a doormat. Let me back up. I'll tell you how it started. She told me to leave my own porch. That's when the line got drawn. If that cold open felt like a ghost story, let me set the record straight. What woke that house wasn't spirits, it was boundaries. I didn't always have them. Not after Elizabeth passed. That's how we got here. I flew into Reno on a Thursday, same as I've done a dozen times since I retired. Picked up a midsize at the rental counter, pointed it toward the lake, and let the miles unwind. By the time you climb over 6,000 feet, the air sharpens. Pine sap rides the wind. The road shoulders are still crusted with old snow in April, a few stubborn drifts hanging on in the shade. The truck's thermometer said 49 degrees Fahrenheit. I rolled the window down anyway. 40 years I built homes in Texas heat. And this house by Tahoe, this was the place Elizabeth and I set aside to grow old gentle. 40 miles from the airport and another 2 around the curve, and there it was, cedar siding catching the late light, stone steps I'd picked myself, a porch big enough for 2 rocking chairs and a second cup of coffee. 2 figures in white bathrobes were already on my terrace with their coffee. My daughter, Megan, 31 and sure-footed as a trial lawyer, leaned on the rail like she owned the view. Her husband, Brandon, shifted when he spotted me, as if he'd been caught standing where the floor still needed curing. I set my bag down on the flagstone and reached for the spare key in my pocket, out of habit more than anything. Megan's voice cut clean across the yard. Dad? You can't stay. We're here for the weekend. Now I'm not a man who needs to announce himself. Paperwork does that fine. My name is on the deed, twice, once from the day we closed and once after. Elizabeth's estate settled. I started to say as much, then stopped. It wasn't the words. It was the way she looked at me, cool as February in Amarillo, like I was a neighbor who'd parked a tractor on her lawn. We've got plans, she said, chin tipping toward the house. You'll just be in the way. There's a special kind of silence that lives in the space where respect used to be. I felt it then. Brandon tried to say something about dinner reservations. Megan waved him off like a fly. I could have pushed past them. I could have called the sheriff. Instead, I stood there and took stock the way I've always done when a foundation feels wrong underfoot. Feet steady. Breath slow. Don't argue when the other party is looking to collect your temper as evidence. I drove a long way, I said. Came to sit in my own chair. Next time, call first, she said, and turned her back to me. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I picked up my bag, walked around to the side door, the one Elizabeth liked, because it opened straight into the kitchen, and that's when I saw the first sign they'd been easing their way in long before this weekend. 2 grocery receipts on the counter from Tahoe Fresh Market. Both from last week, both with Megan's loyalty number stamped at the bottom. A cork on the butcher block and a drip trail like somebody didn't quite know where the dish towels live. On the tile by the mudroom, wet boot prints, not from today's weather. Looked like 2 different sizes, maybe a men's 11 and a women's 8. Someone had used the spare key I'd given my daughter, for emergencies. Apparently, emergencies now include date nights with lake views. I set the receipts back where I found them. The house was quiet. You can hear quiet if you've spent your life around job sites and nail guns. There's a hum to well-made things, a whisper of air through a vent, the tick of a baseboard settling. Elizabeth used to say the villa breathed. Today it held its breath. Back at the driveway, I paused long enough to look at the siding we stained on our 20th anniversary. I remembered the way she laughed when I got a streak of cedar oil on my cheek. Grief does funny math. It makes you trade, no for maybe, and later for it's fine. I climbed into the rental and let the engine idle. I didn't give Megan any more of my words. I gave myself a few instead. This isn't about a weekend. This is about a line. The phone call came that evening, after I checked into a motel on the Nevada side where the clerk still hands you a real key and the ice machine groans like an old starter motor. Megan's number lit the screen. I answered because I still believed there was something to save. Listen carefully, she said. Voice like a closed door. Brandon and I have decided the lake house belongs to his parents now. We're moving them in. You're not to go back there. I stared at the little motel desk with the burn ring from somebody's curling iron and felt something shift inside. It wasn't anger, not first. It was a question. When did my daughter learn to speak to me as if I were a tenant? No, I said. Calm as I could make it. Just the one word. You'd be surprised how much weight it can carry when it's been missing a while. Silence. Then, you don't get to say no. I just did. She adjusted her aim. You hardly use it. They need housing. Stop being selfish. I could have rattled off the checks I've written, the car I bought when theirs died on I-35, the wedding costs, the student loans I took on because she switched programs and needed one more semester. I didn't. I said. It's my house. She said. Not anymore. And hung up. I don't know what your body does when a person you love draws a hard line across your life. Mine went quiet. Heart steady. Hands still. I'd spent decades talking men twice my size out of change orders they had no business submitting. This was a different fight. Same rules. Measure twice, cut once. Know your materials. Don't build on mud. An hour later, Aunt June called from San Marcos. Elizabeth's sister has a way of knowing things right before I do. Hank, she said soft, like she used to talk to her baby sister before chemo. I found a letter in Liz's cedar box. Must have been meant for you after, well. You want me to read it? I said yes. And June took her time. Elizabeth always did choose her words. Be kind, June read. But don't be a doormat. If grief makes you soft, let it be in your hands, not your backbone. Our girl's got a good heart, but she pushes. You'll need your fence posts set deep. June cleared her throat. There's more. I heard what I needed, I said, and we sat with the quiet like 2 old friends on a porch. Swing. I flew home the next morning. Texas air felt heavy in a way that made me grateful, like a quilt laid over a sleeping man. Back in the hill country, the dawn measured 62 degrees. The mockingbird trying out a medley on the fence line, coffee steaming in my right hand. My bad knee didn't complain climbing the steps. I stood where the cedar meets the limestone and I let the night's hurt burn off with the fog. My phone buzzed with an alert from the insurance company. Request received to add an additional insured/authorized contact to your homeowner's policy, it said. With a Sacramento area callback number and an email I didn't recognize. Someone was trying to put their name somewhere it didn't belong. It takes a second to log in with these new two-step codes. But I did it, declined the change, and locked the account with a passphrase only Elizabeth would have laughed at. Then I called the number and left a message in the even tone I learned dealing with inspectors who like to flex on Fridays. This is the owner. No changes authorized. Future attempts will be documented. If you're my age, you know the world shifts faster than we like. Passwords and pins. E-signatures. Folks can lay a lot of paper you never see if you're not watching your mailbox. So I started a folder that morning. Dates, times, who said what. If you carry a tool belt long enough, you learn that a tape measure and a notebook solve more problems than a hammer. I thought about dialing Megan and telling her about the letter, or the policy alert, or the wet boot prints in my kitchen. But hard truths land better when your house is in order. I don't mean the cedar and the stone. I mean the deed, the will, the list of who's on your accounts and who's not. We talked a lot about love in our home. We should have talked more about boundaries. That's on me. By mid-morning, I'd cleaned the percolator, fed the neighbor's healer through the fence, he visits like clockwork, and watched the sun clear the live oaks. I let my mind go back over the last 3 years with the same eye I'd used to walk a slab before the pour. Poke the form. Check the slopes, make sure the water runs where you intend. When did gifts turn into obligations? When did Dad, can you help? Turn into Dad, you will? When did my porch light become a lighthouse for everybody else's storms? If you've ever raised a child into a capable adult, you know the bittersweet part, the day they stop needing your hand. If you're unlucky, you also meet the other part, the day they stop seeing your heart. I'd allowed my grief to make me agreeable past the point of wisdom. Elizabeth's letter gave me permission to correct that. Truth is, I didn't need permission. I just needed to remember who taught Megan to say please and thank you, to push her chair in, to hold the door, her mother and me. The same folks who knew how to build a fence without making an enemy out of a neighbor. Before lunch, I walked my property line. We've got just under 2 acres. Mesquite on the west side, a small wash that only runs hard after a 3-inch rain, and a stretch of fence I keep tight because deer will test it after a dry spell. Fences matter. They don't say, I hate you. They say, this is mine to tend. The world reads strength in a straight fence line. So do families. Back on the porch, I set my coffee down and looked at the old photo of me and Elizabeth standing in front of the Tahoe fireplace on the day we hung the first Christmas stockings up. There. Wait of what came next. Then I spoke it out loud, so there'd be no mistaking my intentions, not to myself and not to the God who heard Elizabeth's prayers long before he took her home. I was born at night, I said, but not last night. This ain't my first rodeo. It will be my last one with you holding the reins. You can call that a threat. I call it a boundary stated plain. And once a boundary is set, a man my age knows the next 3 steps by heart. Get your papers straight, get your plan in order, and keep your voice calm. Folks mistake calm for weakness. They only make that mistake once. Don't raise your voice, raise your paperwork. First thing Monday morning, I took the advice I'd given 100 young foremen. When a job turns sideways, don't raise your voice, raise your paperwork. I drove into town and sat across from Michaelchin, a property attorney who reads deeds the way I read slab plans. He didn't waste my time with sympathy. He asked for facts. I laid out the receipts from the Tahoe market, the wet boot prints, the call where my own daughter told me to keep off my property, and the insurance alert that someone tried to add themselves to my homeowner's policy. Michael clicked his pen once and said, All right. We build a wall, legal, high, and documented. We started with the basics, copies of the recorded deed, the estate transfer after Elizabeth passed, tax bills with my name, a printout from the county assessor. He enrolled me in the county's property fraud alert, free service, sends an email if anyone tries to record something against my parcel. Then he froze my credit with the big 3 bureaus and helped me lock down my insurer account behind 2-factor codes even a safecracker couldn't guess. From here on, he said, every conversation with Megan or Brandon is documented. Dates, times, exact words. Save texts. Save voicemails. We'll keep contemporaneous notes. I bought a fat spiral notebook on the way home, the kind with a sturdy back you can write on standing up, and wrote the date at the top in block letters. Old school, sure. But a clean ledger beats memory when the heat's on. I scrolled my phone and screenshotted everything. Missed call, 7:18 p.m. Voicemail, 023. Text, you're not welcome there. I forwarded the lot to Michael. Good, he said on speaker. And Hank? If anyone shows up at your door, don't argue. Ask them to text or email. Paper is kinder than shouting. By lunch, the county recorder's office pinged the first alert, attempted e-filing of a quitclaim deed from Henry Walker to a name I didn't recognize submitted through a third-party portal. The clerk flagged it for mismatched signatures and held it for verification. Michael exhaled through his nose the way men do when they've predicted a storm and just felt the first drop. We'll send a letter now, he said, to the recorder and to whoever filed that garbage. Notice of dispute, slander of title reserved, do not accept fraudulent instruments. He paused. It's not a crime to dream, but it is to file. We'll be ready. That afternoon, I got an unexpected knock, a woman with a clipboard and a badge from Adult Protective Services. Anonymous complaint, concern for my welfare. Happens more than you think, she said gently, and could she come in? I opened my door and my calendar. Showed her my meds lined up in a 7A case, Elizabeth's photo where it always sits, and my morning blood pressure reading, 122/74. I spoke slowly and plain. Told her about the property alert and the call from my daughter. She clicked through her checklist, listened to my heart, and finally nodded. Sir, you're fine. Sometimes families weaponize systems. Document everything. If anyone pressures you again, call 911 or call us. She left her card. I slid it into the spiral's front pocket. I called Pastor Ray next. 70 years old, retired Army chaplain, knows the difference between forgiveness and surrender. I told him the bones of it. He didn't gasp or scold. Hank, he said, voice like a cedar beam, solid, a little weathered. Not likely to bow. You're allowed to say no without apology. If you want me to try a calm sit-down with everyone at a neutral table, I'll do it. But you set the terms. Respect or no meeting. I said I'd think on it. He added, and son, don't let your blood pressure climb the ladder. Breathe, pray, write it down. God can take your anger. Don't hand it to people who'll spend it for you. That evening, I walked over to Derek Collins' place. Derek's the kind of neighbor you thank the Lord for, friendly, curious, and born with a screwdriver in his hand. His home office looks like the cockpit of a small jet, 3 monitors, spools of cable, gadgets blinking in different colors like Christmas at NASA. Derek, I said, how would you like a puzzle that's entirely legal? A little theatrical, and very memorable? He raised an eyebrow and grinned. Fred, you just described my love language. I laid it out, no traps, no block exits, nothing that would get a firefighter mad at me. Just smart home features doing exactly what they're meant to do. Lights respond to motion, voice assistant announces warnings, water turns on with a command, door locks engage and disengage. On timers. He nodded and started sketching. We can do motion sensors in every room, entry, hall, living, bedrooms, tied to lighting scenes. I'll program a voice assistant to state clear warnings. Unauthorized occupants detected. Leave the premises. Projectors can throw moving shadows. Speakers in the ceiling can layer ambience, footsteps, wind, a few spine tingles. We'll give it all a battery backup you could run a freezer on. And we'll make sure there's always an exit, 30-second unlock on outside doors after any prolonged lock cycle. Derek, I said, if a deputy shows up, I want him to see a house that's well within code, just spirited. He laughed. We'll call it a demonstration of modern automation. We booked 2 plane tickets to Reno for Wednesday. Packed our gear into hard cases, the kind that survive baggage handlers, and I printed a laminated sign to mount inside the front door. Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk. Clear, visible, lawful warning. On the way home, my phone buzzed from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Derek listened with me 10 minutes later, lips tightening as a voice he recognized. Brandon offered him a couple grand cash to accidentally disable any system we might be thinking about installing. Derek didn't delete it. He forwarded the audio to me, then to Michael. And he sent a 2-sentence text to the number. Decline. Further contact will be recorded. Michael's reply arrived in under a minute. Save it. Valuable if they claim innocence. Before bed. My chest tightened in that vague, worrying way grief sometimes does. No sharp pain, just a reminder that hearts aren't made of oak. I sat, counted breaths, and then did something men my age don't do. Often enough, I made an appointment. Tuesday morning the nurse wrapped the cuff around my upper arm and smiled when the numbers came back steady. The EKG inked out a polite rhythm, nothing dramatic. The doctor listened and then looked me in the eye. Mr. Walker, you're fine. Your machine's tight. Don't pour gasoline on it with worry. Walk in the mornings. Lay off the salt a touch. Keep doing what you're doing, calm, deliberate steps. I left with my shoulders a half-inch lower and a fresh respect for simple routines. Back at Michael's office, we drafted Plan B. If Act 3 goes sideways, he said, we still protect the asset. He laid out the documents, a charitable donation of the Tahoe property to the Second Chance Foundation, a legitimate 501c3, with a life estate reserved for me. Translation for anyone my age who doesn't speak lawyer. You deed it to charity now, you still use it until you pass, and nobody, no child, no in-law, no court-shopped emergency, can pull it out from under you. He flagged the title with a preliminary notice so any title company searching would see activity. We won't record until you give the word, he said. But the papers will be buttoned up and ready to file. Bradley Walsh still notarizing? I asked. Michael nodded. He's set to witness, and we'll have a runner at the recorder the minute you sign. He leaned back. Hank, you've moved from defense to position. That changes how they talk to you, whether they know it or not. We flew out Wednesday with 2 hard cases and a carry-on full of cables Derek swore TSA sees every hour. Picked up a cargo van in Reno, rear seats pulled, 40 cubic feet of space, and took the grade up to the lake, passing snow still crusted in the cuts where the plows had thrown it. The house stood the way a good house does when it's waiting for its owner, quiet, a little proud, not at all surprised you came back. Derek turned like a general. Mapping terrain. Sensors here and here, he said, pointing to the entry in the hall. Projector on that beam casts shadows across the wall. Speakers tucked into the return vents. Sounds like footsteps behind them. Door locks integrated with a 30-second delay so nobody can claim false imprisonment. Battery bank goes in the basement, out of sight, plenty of ventilation. I mounted the laminated warning sign beside the inside lock, polite, visible, impossible to miss. We tested a first sequence. I walked in, lights came up and a cool white voice assistant stated calmly, "Welcome, Hank." Derek grinned. Now the unauthorized profile. He toggled the tablet. The light scene shifted to a strobe, the voice changed to firm and formal. Unauthorized occupants detected. Leave the premises. Faucets in the kitchen hissed alight for 5 seconds, then shut. A demonstration, not a waste. The projectors threw slow-moving silhouettes like a stranger just walked past the lamp. I told you, theatrical, not dangerous. Before dinner, a deputy rolled up slow, as they do in vacation towns, lights off, posture easy. Someone, no points for guessing, had called about suspicious activity. I met him at the walk. Afternoon, deputy, I said. Just a homeowner testing legally installed automation. Doors release every 30 seconds. Power backup has a UL sticker. No firearms, no tripwires. He turned politely, logged my driver's license, gave me a nod reserved for folks who aren't wasting his time. Sir, just don't trap anybody. And if you're away, consider a yard sign. People take a hint. I held up the laminated notice. Already ahead of you. That night I called Pastor Ray and said I'd take the mediation if Megan could manage civility. We'd do it Friday by phone, neutral conference line, recorded with everyone's consent, ground rules simple, no shouting, no threats, no demands. He agreed to moderate. And Hank? He said. Sometimes a person can't hear the word no until they meet it twice. Back at the villa, Derek ran a final diagnostic while I walked room to room and thought about Elizabeth's letter. Be kind. But don't be a doormat. A home is a place where kindness can live without fear. My mistake had been confusing my daughter's comfort with my wife's memory. Those are not the same thing. Thursday morning, property alert pinged again, an attempt to file a lease pendens, a notice of a supposed lawsuit, against my address. Michael was already on it, drafting a motion to expunge and asking the judge for fees. They're throwing spaghetti, he said dryly. Our job is to keep the wall clean. By noon, Derek had programmed geofencing so my phone could arm and disarm systems automatically. When I was within a mile, the cameras were set with privacy shutters that opened only when the system armed. No peeking, no creep factor, just security. We set the audio to escalate slowly, polite. First, firm after motion continued, then unmistakable warnings. We logged every setting, every test, every time code, because in a world like this, you protect yourself with truth on paper. On the way back to the airport, I called Bradley. Have your stamp ready Monday, I said. He chuckled. Ink's fresh, Hank. And if anyone tells you you're being harsh, send them to me. I'll explain the difference between a boundary and a grudge. When I got home to Texas, the evening laid down soft. I sat on my porch with the spiral open and wrote out the plan in a hand that didn't shake. Friday, mediated call. Saturday, rest. Sunday, observe. Monday, record transfer if necessary. Underline necessary twice. I closed my eyes and pictured Elizabeth's smile in the lake. Light. You can love your child and still lock your door. You can forgive and still keep your deed. You can be kind without laying down like a rug. Some fights you win by shouting. This one, I'd win by showing up with my paperwork, my patience, and a house that knew when to say, politely but firmly, you don't belong here. If a home consents trespass, wait till you hear what it did. At 2 a.m. Sunday came with a pale shine on the lake and a knot in my gut I'd learned to trust. I was back in Texas, at my desk with 3 monitors lit like a control tower. The feeds from Tahoe were clean and steady: entry, living room, hall, bedrooms, porch. Air 58 degrees Fahrenheit up there, wind from the west at 12 miles an hour. At 2:28 in the afternoon, a dark blue minivan turned onto my drive like it had visited 100 Sundays. Megan stepped out first, sunglasses high, chin higher. Brandon came around the hood and opened the sliding door for Walt and Darlene, who already had their house slippers in a tote. Suitcases followed like a parade. They gathered at the porch where Derek and I had mounted that laminated sign, "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." Megan read it, rolled her eyes, and said something I couldn't hear over the porch mic because she said it with her mouth tight, not to the room, but to her audience. Darlene reached for the bracket. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said and yanked. The screws held, the wood didn't. The sign came off in her hand. Across the road, my neighbor's doorbell cam caught the whole thing in clear daylight. He texted me the clip 5 minutes later. "Need this?" I saved it to the spiral with a timestamp. Brandon used a key I recognized and shouldn't have, copied from the emergency spare I'd trusted to my daughter. The door opened on a house that looked exactly like itself. No tricks in daylight, no strobe, no shadows. Just a steady tone from the entry chime and a polite voice from the ceiling. "This property is equipped with automated systems. Authorized users only." Darlene wrinkled her nose like she'd caught a smell. Walt set a box down and looked around the way men do when they know they're stepping over a line and hope nobody notices. Megan laughed, loud and bright, and led the march inside, heels ticking like a metronome. Afternoon wore itself thin. They made the tour. Opened drawers that didn't belong to them, stood in the master, and held their hands apart to guess if a king would fit better this way or that. Brandon measured windows with a tape measure he'd brought from the minivan, said something about blackout curtains and new rods. Walt opened the pantry and smiled like he'd found gold. Darlene put her slippers on, a small, simple claim that said more than her words. I watched from my chair and wrote everything down quietly. Time, movement, who carried what. Calm is a tool when you have it in your hand. Around 4, a new player arrived. A local pastor, collar and old Bible, the kind of man you ask to bless a house if you're trying to make it yours by ceremony. Megan must have made the call. He stepped into the entry and tipped his head at the ceiling speaker when the chimes sounded again, softer this time, like a reminder. "Miss," he said kindly, "does the owner know you're here?" Megan waved a hand. "Family," she said. Like that word erases deeds. He bowed his head and began a blessing anyway, scripture about peace and shelter. As he spoke, the voice assistant followed its programming. Automated system active. Unauthorized occupancy detected. The pastor stopped mid-verse, looked at Megan again, and then at Walt. "Ma'am," he said gently, "peace starts with doing right. If this isn't yours, no prayer will make it so." He left without an argument. I added that to the ledger too. Dusk came down early with a low cloud deck, and the forecast called for a line of thunderstorms after midnight. The lake will show you who's boss when the barometer falls. I armed the system for night mode at 9:45 p.m., confirmed every safety setting we drilled. Doors set to release on a rolling 30-second cycle. Smoke detectors independent of the automation. Battery bank charged to the green. Warning messages loaded, polite, firm, unmistakable. Lights mapped, entry, hall, living, bedrooms. Water set to pulse so we wouldn't run the well like a busted hydrant. Projections aimed at blank walls for maximum effect. Speakers balanced so whispers felt like they came from behind your shoulder. And never from a corner where someone could claim a person stood. At 10:12 p.m., Megan texted me a single line. "We're here. Don't come." I didn't answer. I set a fresh pot in the percolator. Walked the length of my porch to keep my knee loose, and recited Elizabeth's letter in my head like a psalm. Be kind, but don't be a doormat. I'd failed that test plenty. Not tonight. When the clock on my desk rolled past 2 a.m., the wind at Tahoe rose to 35-mile gusts, and the first hard rain hit those big windows like a jar of BBs. I tapped execute on the tablet. And the house woke like a ranch dog who knows the rattle of a bad truck coming up the road. Lights snapped from warm to cold, then strobed in a slow, steady pattern, not enough to trigger a seizure. Plenty to demand attention. The voice assistant spoke in a level tone first. "Attention. This property belongs to Hank Walker. Unauthorized occupants detected. Please leave the premises." 10 seconds. Motion continued. Level 2. Security protocol engaged. Exit doors will release every 30 seconds. Authorities will be notified. Faucets opened across the house in a staggered pattern: kitchen, guest bath, master vanity, water, a live sound that makes the brain move even when the feet don't. Projectors threw long shadows across the walls. Not ghosts. Just shapes. Enough to stir the part of the mind that notices a silhouette where none should be. Darlene screamed first, a high, thin sound that cracked in the middle. Walt muttered something like a prayer and headed for the hall panel where any sane house keeps a breaker box. Brandon beat him to it, swung the door, and frowned into a panel lit steady as a Sunday school verse. He flipped the main. The batteries didn't even yawn. Lights kept their measured pulse. Voice held its tone. Exit doors will unlatch in 20 seconds. Please leave. Megan clutched her phone like it could call dignity. She tried 911 anyway, wearing the voice she uses with people she thinks will believe her first. The dispatcher took the report like he'd heard 100 smart home tirades and sent a unit because that's what good deputies do when a caller says panic twice. By 2:24 a.m., the storm laid a hard hand on the roof, and the system stepped to level 3. The soundscape deepened, footsteps on the stairs that didn't exist, whined through a window that was shut, an old hinge creak at the edge of hearing. The voice got louder, not cruel, just impossible to ignore. Immediate exit recommended. Unauthorized occupants remain on site. I watched Walt test a door. It wouldn't open. 30 seconds later it would. He didn't wait. He pulled again and started to pound. The lock released right on time. He stumbled onto the porch and looked back like a man who has just understood a truth he didn't care for. In the living room, Brandon found an exterior camera tucked under the eave and decided to solve his dignity with his fists. He drew back and threw a clumsy punch. The hydra-headed system didn't care about his pride. The sprinkler valve opened with a cheerful cough and doused him from the waist up. The voice stayed on script. Vandalism recorded. Exit doors are unlocked. Neighbor houses carry sound in wet air. The doorbell cam across the way caught that swing, that drench. And that face in full HD. I saved the clip. Calm is a tool. Evidence is a blessing. At 3:06 a.m., Megan tried a different door and got a different piece of theater. The path lights lit toward the driveway, steady and white, like a runway. The front door latch clicked. If they stood still 30 seconds, it would lock again. They froze, missed the window, swore, and pulled anyway. Not a trap. Not a trick. Just a rule. The difference matters in the kind of world where honest men still wear badges and tell the truth on reports. The house repeated its last line, unemotional and relentless. Exit doors will unlatch every 30 seconds. Please leave. At 6:02 a.m., red and blue lights rolled slow up the drive. No siren, no rush. Deputy Tom Alvarez stepped out, hat on, posture easy. Hand near his belt because he's seen enough to know routine calls stop being routine without much notice. He listened to Megan's quick history. He listened to the house with his eyes. He read the sign bracket scars where Darlene had torn through softwood. He studied the lock status on my app through the glass because I put the screen where a peace officer could see it if he wanted. He said the words I knew and hoped he'd say. Looks like a smart home malfunction, folks. Nothing criminal. If you don't have the owner's permission, you might be an unlawful detainer. Territory. Best clear out and talk to a judge instead of trying to weather this out. They didn't argue with a badge. Pride prefers softer targets. They grabbed a couple bags and went to the minivan. Megan called me from the passenger seat. What did you do? She hissed. I kept my voice level. Protected my house with legal tools. Doors aren't locked. You can leave any time you like. She threw a threat shaped like a promise. We'll change the locks. I said, on property you don't own? She hung up, which is how some people lose arguments when their words run out before their certainty does. By 10 o'clock, they were back with a locksmith whose truck had a cartoon key on the side and a man inside who knew ordinary hardware like I know a 16-ounce framing hammer. He took one look at the integrated locks, the biometric pads, the battery bank, and shook his head. "Ma'am, you need a tech specialist, not me. This is tied into a home system. You'd have to reprogram the network. And I'd need the owner's written permission." Brandon tried to lean on him like he leans on a grocery cart when it's full. The man packed his tools and left. Good sense is one of God's common gifts. Deputy Alvarez rolled by again. Funny how patrols tighten when storm calls and neighbor reports line up. He didn't knock this time. He spoke from the porch, polite but firm. "Folks, I'm not your lawyer, and I don't want to be. But changing locks on a place you don't own won't help you. Take it to court if you think you've got a case. Until then, you're courting trouble." Walt nodded like a man who's carried more weight than he admits. Darlene dabbed her eyes. "Pride has a way of drying up when the sun is up and your clothes are still damp from a sprinkler you earned." From my chair in Texas, I took a breath that felt like a fence post set true. The house had done its job, with courtesy, with clarity, without breaking a single law or bone. It had stated the rules in a voice anyone could hear. This place belongs to someone who cares for it, and you are not him. Boundaries aren't about spite. They're about stewardship. We fence pastures. Not because we hate cattle, but because we love them and the grass both. You learn that in Texas early, or you learn it late. Either way you learn. I disarmed the night sequence and let the villa settle back into itself. The cameras went to privacy shutters, the lights held steady, the faucets stayed dry. On the driveway feed, Megan stood with her hands on her hips like a coach whose playbook just tore in half. Brandon stared at his shoes. Walt put a hand on his son's shoulder. Darlene looked at the porch like it had betrayed her personally. 10 minutes later they drove off. The neighbor's doorbell pinged with a new message. "If you need a statement, I'll give one." I texted back a thank you and told him to keep his Sunday. When Megan called again that afternoon, her voice had lost most of its armor. "We'll be back," she said, like a movie villain who doesn't know how the reel ends. "I'm sure you will," I said. "Bring a warrant or bring some respect. Either one will work." She hung up without choosing. Boundaries do that to folks. They make you decide who you're going to be next. And if you're wondering whether I felt sorry, I'll tell you plain. I felt relief. The house had spoken a truth I should have said months ago. Sometimes a place knows who belongs before the people do. Sometimes a door teaches a lesson a father couldn't. Even with all the love in his chest. When the stamp hits the deed, everything changes. Monday didn't dawn so much as arrive with purpose. I had coffee in my hand before the mockingbird picked his first tune, and my plan laid out line by line in that spiral notebook. Paper beats panic. At 8 a.m., I was in Michael Chen's office. By 8:30, we were reading aloud each paragraph of the documents we'd prepared, slow, steady, no skipped lines. You don't rush a foundation pour, and you don't rush a deed transfer that's going to end in argument. We signed in front of Bradley Walsh at 8:57 a.m., ink neat, witnesses clear, notary stamp crisp enough to cut. Then Michael's runner took the packet like a baton and headed for the county recorder. At 9:19 a.m., my phone buzzed with the words I'd been working towards since Megan told me to keep off my own porch. Recorded. Grantee, Second Chance Foundation. Life estate reserved to Hank Walker. For folks my age who don't speak courthouse, it means the villa belongs to a real charity now, not to family squabbles, and I keep full use until I'm called home. No one can pry it loose. Not with a tantrum. Not with a trick. Not even with a slick lawyer. The hammer had fallen. Quietly. Irrevocably. I wish I could say everyone took it on the chin with grace. By lunchtime, Megan had posted a little speech online. Something about an elderly father manipulated by lawyers. And a haunted house stunt. Pastor Ray texted before I even saw it. Don't take the bait. He was right. I posted one line. The matter is resolved. No further comment. And put the phone face down. You'd be amazed how fast a brush fire dies when there's no wind to carry it. A couple of old friends, one a veteran buddy, one from the church men's group, left steady notes like fence posts. We know Hank. He does right. That did more than any paragraph I could have written. At 2 p.m., they came to Bradley's office like a front. Rolling in, Megan first, chin set, Brandon a step behind, jaw tight, Walt and Darlene trailing with the look of folks who want a miracle and will settle for a shortcut. Bradley's conference table has seen its share of family storms. He greeted them like it was any other Tuesday, because for him it was, and asked everyone to sit. Megan didn't. We're here to get the transfer done, she said. Eyes on me like I owed her a pen. Bradley folded his hands. Ms. Walker, a transfer today would be impossible. He slid a certified copy across the table, then another, one for each of them. Even though only one of us had any right to hold it. At 9:19 this morning, Mr. Walker deeded the Tahoe property to the Second Chance Foundation. He retained a life estate. The transfer is lawful and recorded. It cannot be reversed without the charity's consent. They will not consent. Silence carries weight in a room like that. Darlene's mouth opened, then closed. Walt looked down at his hands. Brandon leaned forward as if he could muscle paper. He can just sign it back, he said. Michael spoke for the first time, voice like a level on a beam, no tilt. No, he cannot. Title is vested in the foundation. Mr. Walker keeps full use during his lifetime. After that, it remains with the charity. That's the law. Megan's voice went sharp. You stole our future. I answered the way a man answers when he's done explaining and started protecting. You tried to steal my present. I stopped you. That's all this is. She fired back the cruel lines some people save for last. You'll never meet your grandkids. The words didn't land the way she meant. 3 years ago, they would have broken me. Today they told me who she'd decided to be in that moment. I let them pass like a storm that refuses to rain. Respect is cheaper than lawyers, I said quietly. Shame you learned it the hard way. Michael set a small stack on the table, a printout of the county's fraud alert. About the attempted quitclaim, a copy of the APS visit note that cleared me, a screenshot of the 2:28 p.m. neighbor doorbell video where Darlene rips down my warning sign, a transcript of Brandon's voicemail offering to pay Derek to accidentally disable a system, Deputy Alvarez's incident number, and the line. Technical malfunction, no crime. He didn't wave it like a flag. He slid it across. As if he were handing out hymnals. If anyone intends to accuse Mr. Walker of misconduct, he said, these will be our exhibits 1 through 5. We don't recommend that road. Walt's shoulders sagged. He turned toward me, not as an opponent but as a neighbor who'd stepped over a line in a dry year and put a boot through a fence board. Hank, I was trying to put a roof over Darlene's head. That's the truth. I nodded. I believe you. But it won't be my roof. You can be kind without being a doormat. Elizabeth wrote it long before today. They left with their copies. Megan said. This isn't over. Which is what folks say when it is. Brandon muttered something about court. Michael answered before I needed to. File what you like. We'll respond. That could have been the end of it, but pride likes one last dance. By late afternoon, a lease pendens popped up, legal Latin for we're suing maybe. Wallpaper people slap on title to make a mess. They filed it pro se wrong form. Wrong case number, as sloppy as the rest of their effort. Michael smiled with only his eyes and filed an emergency motion to expunge. The judge set a quick hearing for the next morning, video. 8:30 sharp. I put on a jacket and sat at my desk 10 minutes early. The judge had a voice like a school principal with good shoes. He asked 3 questions, read 2 pages, and granted our motion in less time than it takes to brew a pot. Lease pendants removed, he said. Counsel, prepare an order. Fees to the respondent. Which means, in plain talk, nice try. Now pay the fiddler. I didn't cheer. It wasn't a win to savor. It was housekeeping. But I'll admit the air felt lighter. When the screen went dark, my phone buzzed. Walt. Not a text. A call. I answered. He didn't clear his throat or pretend anything. I'm sorry, he said. We let a need turn into a scheme. I'm ashamed of that. You can respect a man who can say that out loud. Walt, I said, you take care of your home. I'll take care of mine. If you need a number for a legal aid clinic or a church contact up there, I'll text it. But we're done with this house. He sighed. A real one, the kind that empties a man of 3 bad days. That's fair. By noon, Darlene posted a soft note online, the kind women write when they realize the train pulled out and they were on the wrong platform. Brandon said nothing, which was an improvement. Megan sent 1 line. You're dead to me. I didn't answer. Paper is kinder than shouting. Silence is kinder than arguing. Boundaries. Once set, don't need syllables to keep standing. Pastor Ray stopped by that afternoon with 2 barbecue sandwiches wrapped in butcher paper and a look a father gives a son who finally did the thing he'd been putting off. We ate on the porch. He didn't talk law. He talked fences. You built a good one, he said, tapping my spiral with his finger. Deep post, straight line. Folks who hate fences usually haven't mended one. Give it time. I told him I'd offer a path if it ever mattered, family counseling with someone who doesn't flinch, a written apology that names what was wrong. 12 months of steady respectful behavior. That's not a bribe, he said. That's discipleship with conditions. It's up to them. I called Derek next and asked him to send me the checklist for taking down our theater. Already on your email, he said. And Hank? You did right. I booked a flight for Thursday and a rental with room for cases. Then I sat with the quiet and let my heart rate find its level. The fight was over, not because I yelled the loudest, but because I set the terms and followed through. An old contractor told me once, we don't win with hammers. We win with levels. And patience. If you're waiting for a flourish, I don't have one. Just this, the law can be a scalpel when you keep your hands steady. Charity can be wiser than revenge when you choose it before anger chooses you. And respect, once demanded and enforced, will do more to heal a house than all the shouting a family can manage in a lifetime. On Friday, Michael sent the stamped order expunging that lease pendants and a statement of fees the court tagged to the filing. I filed it in the spiral and closed the cover. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like a man who finally stood where his own front step begins and said, here. Sometimes the hammer falls with a bang. Mine fell with a notary stamp, a clerk's time stamp, and a deputy's quiet nod. That's enough noise for me. 2 days after the papers recorded, I flew to Reno, drove the grade with the window cracked, and reached the villa before sunrise. 48 degrees Fahrenheit on the porch. The lake laid out like polished steel. I disarmed the system, then did what I promised myself I'd do, took the theater down, piece by piece. Sensors unscrewed with a soft click. Adhesive tabs peeled. Without protest. Projectors back in their cases. The battery bank shut down clean, no drama. When the last speaker came off the return vent, the house did what good houses do when the storm passes. It exhaled. I set Derek's gear in labeled totes and hauled them to the car. On my way back through the entry, I lifted the laminated House of the Future sign, wiped the bracket scars smooth, and slid the sign into a drawer. Tools back in the toolbox, not because I'm afraid to use them, but because I don't need to anymore. Coffee in hand, I took Elizabeth's photograph to the terrace and read her letter one more time. Be kind, but don't be a doormat. I framed a copy and set it on the mantel, not as a warning to anyone else, but as a promise to myself. The Charities sent a simple note to my P.O. box back in Texas. Thank you for your generous gift. Your life estate has been recorded. Your legacy will shelter families when the time comes. That was enough. I called Pastor Ray from the steps. He listened to the quiet over the line. Forgiveness, he said, doesn't mean forfeiting your future. I told him I'd laid out a path in a sealed letter to Megan, family counseling. A written apology that names the harm, 12 months of steady respect before we try holidays again. Not a threat, not a bribe. Just fence posts set deep. He said. Good. A fence keeps the cattle safe and the pasture green. Walt texted a thank you for the numbers I sent, legal aid and a church contact near the lake. Darlene sent a recipe for banana bread like a white flag in a kitchen. Brandon stayed quiet. Megan didn't write. I let the silence be. You can keep a door unlocked on your heart and still keep a lock on your house. I walked the shoreline path for 2 miles, knee steady, heart easy as a porch fan. When I came back, I opened my spiral, wrote the date, and under it, case closed. Then I put the notebook away. Sun pushed over the peaks and turned the water to coins. I stood on my own porch, no sirens, no shouting, no proving, and I told the morning what I'd learned too late and just in time. You can love your child and still lock your door. You can forgive and still keep your deed. Kindness without boundaries ain't kindness at all. It's just trouble looking for a place to sleep. Not here. Not anymore. On Thursday I walked the Tahoe place like a man checking fence line after a storm, unhooking what didn't belong and keeping what did. The projectors came down first, then the palm-sized speakers, the motion sensors tucked by the crown molding, the battery bank humming steady as a church organ in the basement. 2 hard cases later, the villa breathed again, no strobe, no recorded footsteps, just window latches clicking and lake air rolling in at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I set a 12-ounce mug under the percolator, opened the side door Elizabeth loved, and let the pine and wet stone settle the last of my nerves. Derek met me at his garage that afternoon. I handed over the gear and a full-wrapped half-brisket. He laughed and said, You did right. Back on the terrace, I unfolded Elizabeth's letter till the creases felt familiar as prayer. Be kind, but don't be a doormat. I updated my will, left the emergency key with Michael instead of family, and wrote a 1-page path for reconciliation, family counseling, a written apology that names the harm, 12 months of steady respect. The gate is there if they want it. The fence posts stay deep. Pastor Ray called at dusk. Keep the gate oiled, he said, but don't move the posts. I slept with the windows cracked and woke before sunrise to a lake as smooth as a clean pour, a blue heron lifting off the reeds, and a 5-mile breeze that barely nudged the dock lines. A text from my neighbor. Minivan hasn't been back. A voicemail from Walt. Found a rental, thanks for the numbers. I wished them well and meant it. The Charities receipt. Hit my inbox with a simple line, Your gift will keep someone indoors this winter, and I sent another $1,000 because peace, like roofs, needs maintenance. I stood where the cedar meets the stone and said what I should have said from the start, this is mine to tend. The lake kept to its banks, the mountains kept their shoulders, and my house kept its quiet. Folks think peace arrives with trumpets. In my experience, it shows up like a second cup of coffee when the light turns gold, steady, earned, and quiet as a promise. Kindness, yes. But with boundaries. Always with boundaries. Here's the lesson I carried home, written in ink beside Elizabeth's letter. Kindness without boundaries isn't love, it's an invitation to be used. Grief softened my backbone until my own daughter mistook generosity for surrender. What turned it around wasn't shouting, but stewardship. Paper over panic. Dates, deeds, recordings, neighbors who tell the truth, a deputy who knows the law. A house that spoke in clear, lawful sentences when I finally did. When I deeded the villa to a charity and kept a life estate, I didn't punish family. I protected what I was given to tend. Fences aren't for enemies. They're for cattle and conscience. Posts set deep so storms don't carry off what matters. Forgiveness still stands. There's a gate, counseling, apology, a year of steady respect. But the posts won't move. If you're my age and you feel that line being crossed, measure twice, cut once, talk to counsel, secure your accounts, write things down, say no without a tremor. Silence outruns gossip. Respect is cheaper than lawyers. And peace? It arrives quiet as a second cup of coffee, when a house keeps its quiet and a man remembers whose name is on the deed, his and the Lord's. Every day. Want the exact checklist Hank used? Comment checklist. I'll pin a free PDF, not legal advice. Subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, justice, and smart planning.